Good morning, and welcome to another episode of Off the Record with KyleSellsBiz. Each and every week, we come to you with special guests. We talk about all aspects of mergers and acquisitions. I love to bring some experts and different that have different expertise when it relates to buying and selling businesses. If you're listening to this podcast live or in the recording, you're either a business owner that has went through an acquisition or contemplating an acquisition, or in the process of getting your business ready for an exit, or you're an advisor seeking some additional guidance and information on how you can guide your clients to a successful acquisition or exit. We are streaming live on multiple platforms, Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitch, and Twitter, as well as LinkedIn, as I said. There's a link in the broadcast to our LinkedIn feed, which would be our primary feed. So if you're watching this on Facebook, you might want to click that link and join us on LinkedIn. We have a comment box. We take your questions throughout the program today. We're going to run for about 30 minutes or so. So if you have any questions for experts here, be sure to enter them in the comment box. Today we're talking about emotional literacy in M&A, emotional literacy in mergers and acquisitions, guiding decisions and risk in business transitions. And I'm very happy to have the owners and partners of Scott Hackman Ventures, which is a leadership and organization change consulting firm. They specialize in maximizing the value of a company through transitions and change work. They're a boutique firm that works with privately owned companies in the mid-market sector, and they're primarily private and family ownership groups and their executive teams. They utilize process consulting and coaching methods to increase the potential for sustainable growth. And they were founded in 2018 by Scott Hackman, who is joining us here today, and his partner in life and business, Andrea Hackman. They have successfully co-founded and exited 2 companies that I'd love to hear a little bit more about. And joining us today as well is Brant Lingle. And between the 2 of them, they've had a successful tenure running this company. Brant is a specialist in consulting. He brings a wealth of experience in guiding businesses through change and growth. So, awesome. He has a fabulous background. Love to hear about your exit, Scott. But as we kick things off here, maybe you could share a little bit about your background. How you started, what made you decide to start Scott Hackman Ventures, and a little bit more about your background.
Yeah, a little bit about our background. So my wife and I co-founded with my father, actually, a business in 2007. And as we planned the exit in 2018, before that, I was recruited to join a family business agency that specialized in transitions. So that's the ownership and succession. And in that was 2011 to around 2018, really saw an opportunity to increase value by focusing a lot in the development side, both in the ownership side and in the management. So we launched it in 2018 because we wanted to really transform the way owners and leaders think about the human aspect of the transition work.
And Brant, you want to tag in there?
Yeah, so Scott and I have known each other probably since the late 90s, early 2000s. My background is in a lot of executive leadership, organizational leadership, served a number of different nonprofits, a lot of program management, fundraising, staff management, managing a lot of change, organizational change over the years, and also executive director and in the boardroom quite a bit as well. So there's a wealth of experience that I'm able to bring to the table in the conversations that we have with business leaders as they're facing some of the challenges of change and transition.
Awesome. I love it. We're talking today about emotional literacy in M&A. Can you give us some context and emotional literacy, what that looks like when you talk about change of ownership?
So there's a lot of great, Kyle. There's a lot of great work around emotional literacy. I'll just name one thought leader, Dr. Mark Brackett. Just look him up for any podcasts and him talking about emotional literacy in general. It's the ability to accurately name a feeling. Neurologically, it is proven that when we can access the accurate term, we can complete an emotion, therefore giving us access to the prefrontal cortex or the executive function, which is what we want in the boardroom, the ownership room, the M&A room, with our advisors. We want to be accessing our best thinking.
Interesting. So what are some of the main pain points for organizations who use your services?
Yeah, so some of the main pain points are like the people side, the leadership side, and the asset side. So the people side, when preparing for a transition or an exit, it's, do they have the right people? Will the people stay? And how do they develop the incentive and the path for that? It's around the attraction, retention, and development. I want to talk a little bit about after the transition, because after the exit or the transition, there's a lot of value. So there's a value creation before, and then there's a value loss after, because there isn't a lot of thought and attention often in the group on how people feel before and after. And so you can get a lot of attrition, you can get a lot of demoralization, and a lot of at the executive level or the board level, they're not thinking about that. And there's sort of an assumption like it's a good thing. And it's probably actually true. It is a good thing. Probably hasn't been messaged correctly. There hasn't been space and time for the leaders to actually meet one-to-one with the people to sit with them and to create the space for them to really give them the key indicator, which is the feeling, so that they can help them understand the picture, where they're going to go, the path, how they're going to get there, the part, what they're going to play. And those three things are really critical in leading change and increasing value before and after the transition.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that, because most people only think of the post-merge integration and making sure that the messaging is relayed and vision of the company and why they did that is so important to begin with. Most of the time you're focusing on the actual due diligence process and getting that done. But the real work, especially for the buyer who's acquiring a company, you want to make sure to retain the talent and retain the value, and they want to create ROI on their investment, right? And
100%.
One of the most important factors in any deal is the people, right?
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
The systems can be created, processes can be built out, but as we've seen over the years, especially during COVID, having key personnel, especially having some agreements in place, and having them at some point understand the vision of the company and the core values of that business and why they do what they do is extremely important. So maybe it might make sense if you could walk us through that process. What does that look like? And how do you guys get involved with helping that? I'm assuming you work primarily on the private equity side with investors for the most part.
We work primarily actually with the ownership group, so
Okay.
Not the private equity yet. We'd like to work with private equity side, but we'll work with the ownership side. You said something, Kyle, that I think is really important. That it's so simple and so true. The why. Consistently overstating the why. Why is this happening? Because we hate change. Humans hate change. We're hardwired to be defensive. We're looking for all the reasons why this is bad. We're hardwired for safety and survival and protection. We have to recognize that's what we're working with. We're working with humans. When you can take that process and you say, this is why it's happening, this is where we're going, this is your part in it. And by the way, what is the part you see in it? So it's not just telling, but it's also asking and allowing for the natural thing that has to occur for change to be adopted, which is I have to be heard and understood, or I will always work around. I will never fully accept it. And what happens actually is resentments build up and poor communication. And we know without really effective communication, information is not being lifted, problems are not being lifted, best ideas are not being lifted. It's all the potential is locked up. So, and maybe Brant, around the question around what are some ways we do this? Some ideas. I have a story I could tell, but I want to pass it to you because I've done most of the talking so far.
Thanks, Scott. Kind of thinking around this in a conversation with an organization leadership team that they're going through a significant change of CEO and a lot of change of personnel and a lot in the midst of a lot of growth, aggressive growth. And we were talking about the Kubler-Ross change curve, and part of what we shared with them was it's not so much the change that people hate or fear, it's actually the loss that they will experience through that change that holds them back. And if people are resistant to the change, or they're not moving forward, not embracing what's new, it's often because there's a significant sense of loss. And so one example that I was coaching one of the executives, and we got to that point, he was able to identify the loss that he experienced was in the previous regime. He had a high sense of camaraderie and a sense of like in the fire, in the fox, pit together. And now it's a different system, different people. And he almost had that feeling of loss of friendship. And so just to be able to help him identify that, name some emotions around that, it actually helped him. I've seen a very significant transformation of his, mindset and perspective and how he approaches his leadership role in the organization. So that's just one example of helping people name their emotions, identify what's the loss that gets them kind of across the bridge to the new experience.
And that's done through group facilitation and coaching, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Correct. Yep.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I think, go ahead.
Go ahead, Brant. Scott.
So like group facilitation and coaching, one of the things we wanted to offer today is every leader, every advisor investing in learning the actual technical skills for coaching and facilitation will return value in your practice, in your leadership, because the facilitator sets the purpose of the meeting. What's the purpose? It is amazing how many executive and boardrooms we've been in where the purpose is not clear for the actual meeting.
That's so true.
So let's set the purpose. Okay, are we all on? Now we know why we're here. What are the outcomes we want? What are we going to drive towards today? And so you're getting buy-in immediately in these high stakes meetings. I mean, these are high stakes, very expensive meetings. Hopefully we're driving towards an outcome. So if the facilitator move is they're listening, having a third party facilitator, they have no buy-in. They don't have an agenda other than to facilitate the most effective meeting to meet the desired outcomes of the key stakeholders. That's where facilitation is crucial. Coaching is about asking the powerful questions, going back to the emotional state, and creating enough space in those rooms where the leaders are thinking in the executive part of their brain. Mm-hmm. So that's the pause. 4 seconds. Seems like an eternity, because most of what we assume is the thought leader, they're the ones talking the most. And that's really important. We're transferring information. But what am I doing with that information? If not to achieve some sort of desired outcome. And in the merger acquisition, when the seller's trying to get the best deal, the buyer's trying to get the best deal for them. There's the financial part. There is the human part. There's the thing that's happening before, during, and after. And I'll give one example, and then I'll pass to Brant. Recently, we had the opportunity to work with CPA Group, doing the due diligence and the valuation for both. They actually did it both for the buyer and the seller. There was high trust in this transaction. So I was invited into the room to facilitate the meeting. So I facilitated the meeting. All I wanted to say was one of the key things that came out. The number was stated very early, and there was dialogue around the number. But what I noticed in the seller, who was founder, so founders have a unique psychological, emotional identity attached to this thing. There's goodwill, value, there's all these things. But to actually be able to articulate what that is, and then to also know, I don't want the seller did not want to, cripple the seller didn't want to cripple the buyer, because part of the buyout was over terms. Like, he wasn't going to be an immediate windfall of money. It was like a couple of years. So the value had to remain in the company. So his ability to articulate that value allowed them to negotiate a term and a dollar amount that was good for both the buyer and the seller.
It's pretty powerful, because a lot of times of the buyer, when they're doing their assessment, so typically they're going to assess the value primarily based upon the financial history and projections of how well this company's going to do. And it's really hard to assess the people aspect, the talent that comes with the business. They want to make sure the talent's retained, but at the same time, having a seller that's so well versed can articulate that goodwill, as you mentioned, is key, because something that's really hard to translate and quantitate.
Yes.
Right. That's hard. Now, I'm assuming, so you do the group facilitation. I'm assuming you do some sort of assessment, whether it be an anonymous assessment, just to test, just to get a feel for the culture, and maybe you could talk a bit more about that, more of your process as far as how you gather the data from the management and the employees.
Brant, go for it.
We'll do a variety of assessments. With the executive team and upper management, we'll often use Hogan. It gives a lot of insight into personality. We do a lot with TTI and DISC. So it just gets a lay of the land of how people are wired, how they think, how they interact, how they communicate, measuring emotional intelligence. And then we'll also leverage employee engagement surveys that could be either organization-wide or who are the primary leaders who are going to actually manage the change. One of the things that I think may get overlooked, I think in our previous conversation, Kyle, we were talking about this, is what's the psychological safety impact of a significant change, and what happens after? So the decisions made in the room, there's the merger or there's acquisition, and then that transaction is done and the people are there. There could be layoffs. Their desire is to retain top talent, obviously, but it's a whole new regime. It's a whole new system, so to speak. And one of the things that is important to recognize is what's the impact on that person, and we'll facilitate conversation through group facilitation, coaching, and then also using some of those assessments and feedback surveys.
Yeah, maybe you could probably talk a little bit some more about your success stories. I know the one that you mentioned before, but any other real world stories you can share about how this has impacted either the value of a company or set them up for a profitable exit down the road?
Yes. So in more like the tech space, there was a company, it was around for decades, and they wanted to exit to a partner that was an equity partner, and they had very key loyal staff. So what they did is they brought us in to design organizational learning around behavioral principles. And this is one of the, I don't know if it's a trend, like, Ray Dalio, Bridgewater, he wrote a book called Principles. But before that was Keegan and LaHaye out of Harvard wrote a book called Everyone Culture. The companies that have taken this, and there's more and more companies doing this, they're designing beyond values, core values. They're saying, okay, these are the actual principles behaviorally that have made us successful. So we came in, assessed that, created the design, like here are the actual behaviors through assessment. Here are the actual words of the people, that what this means from the floor to the direct line to the front line. Like, this is what the words mean. These are how we act. This is why we win. This is why we're successful. Those behaviors then get embedded into training and development pre-transition. Those are also used afterwards. So you can you can create learning and development models, peer cohort models within a company to retain the talent, to operationalize the principles and the behaviors, and to maintain the value, because they're the ones who are solving the problems, creating the innovative ideas, and they were able to exit at a phenomenal multiple and and retain equity in it as well. Well, and the key leaders stayed, and they brought in, not only that, the key legacy leaders stayed, they brought in phenomenal talent and were able to do cultural integration because they had principles.
That's also something. Let me ask you, how long before the proposed transaction did your team get involved? How long was that process?
We were involved actually quite about 5 years before on the ownership side, and then 2 years before we came into the management and the organization to prepare.
I mean, it just goes to show you have to be proactive, right? This can't be, hey, I got an offer, let's start making some change right away. I think even regardless if you're looking to buy or sell, this is some things you should have implemented in your company regardless.
Oh yeah, it's best practice.
Yeah,
it's hard skills. It's actually a hard skill to learn how to work with difference, to learn how to work with different personalities, to get the best idea. Like that's what the best companies have done.
Yeah. So as you wrap up, I know, Brant, is any key takeaways that our listeners can take back from our talk today, as far as summarizing what we discussed today?
Yeah, I would recommend a couple things real quick, Kyle. One is, if you're not familiar with the feelings wheel, download it, use it, give yourself a challenge every day to name one or two emotions in several conversations or meetings. I think a great example of that was, I'm a huge Philadelphia Eagles fan. I watched the press conference after the big win, and the head coach named his emotion of happiness. And he literally said, "I'm feeling happiness. That is the emotion that I'm naming." So that, as Scott shared earlier, when you do that, it brings the power of that emotional literacy to the prefrontal cortex and helps be more effective leading. The second is, I want to share a quick unsuccess story. We had a transition from generation 1 to generation 2. Our primary relationship of trust and alliance was with generation 1, and we did not yet have the opportunity to fully form that with generation 2. Their power and ownership and leadership transition happened, and we were not able to maintain that relationship because we did not build that trust and alliance with generation 2. And so that was something we learned through that process, is how important, when there is a change of leadership, that if you're in senior management or you are senior management, you need to be strategic about the relationships that you're strengthening. And then the last thing is the 5 principles of healthy leadership transition: continuity and stability, trust and credibility, clear communication, responsiveness to concerns, managing complexities, and a defined, change and transition plan.
Yeah, those stories does help, because when you sit down with your clients, you not only have the success stories, you can tell them what went wrong. So you actually educating them in the process too, right? So they know not to make that mistake, and give them even a better reason why they should hire Scott Hackman Ventures. With that being said, how can folks get a hold of you? Is it best through your website, LinkedIn? You mind sharing your respective information so that our listeners can learn a little bit more about what you guys do and chat with you guys offline?
Yes, absolutely. That'd be great. And we love hearing stories, and we'll happily converse about where you're at in your prep, your transition, your transaction. And so it'll be our LinkedIn, email, and our website. I'll just post it here in the chat.
Yeah. And we do have some folks that listen online through a podcast, so maybe you want to share that verbally as well. That'd be helpful.
Yes. So Scott at scotthackman.com. Website is scotthackman.com, and LinkedIn, Scott Hackman. Brant, how about you?
I posted mine in the chat. Calendly link as well if you want to set up a call. Brant at Scott Hackman, and Brant Lingle is my LinkedIn handle. So
awesome. Well, I mean, I see a lot of synergies. I know, Brant, you and I have spoken before, and there's definitely a lot of synergies between what we do as a company and what you guys bring to the table. And identifying that emotional literacy as an asset is very important to convey and retain and create some value there, and show the value for that company to respective buyers. So I'm doing a lot of work out in Philly. We work nationwide as well, but specifically we expand out in the Philly area, New Jersey. So love to connect you guys and see how we can work more closely together, so we can help these clients get more for their business when they finally transition. I think part of it too is I do hear a lot of crazy stories about you guys know I'm talking about employees that have been through mergers, and it's never a good one, right?
Right.
So having a firm like yours get the management team prepped, get them trained, and get them in a position where it's a more smoother process and everyone is in line and rowing in the right direction is very, very important.
Yeah,
100%.
Yeah, that would be an honor, Kyle. We look forward to ongoing connection with you and your firm.
Yeah. Definitely. Well, I appreciate you guys, Brant, Scott, joining us. We do this each and every Wednesday. Well, I'll take that back, not each and every Wednesday, but we for the most part, we're here on Wednesdays. We'll be back again next Wednesday with another special guest. But I appreciate you guys joining in. The recording will be available on the various sites between LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, so you can catch the recording. And we will be streaming this. This will be repurposed and streamed on Spotify and all of the podcast networks. So thank you both. Do enjoy the rest of your day. I'm looking forward to continue our dialogue, and have a good day, guys.
Thanks, Kyle. Take care.
Thank you.